Imagine for a moment a world without art, without dance, opera, literature, poetry. That world would be a very, very dull place.
Today on the show, we have DJ Sep, one of the longest running DJs of the Bay Area. She is the founder, promoter, and main resident at Dub Mission, one of the longest running reggae parties in the world from 1996 until 2018. It was voted the Bay Area's best reggae club 5 out of 6 years in a row, and the Dub Mission has featured international artists from across the dub spectrum. But also for 22 years, Sep has also been a Bay Area radio host, first on KXSF, Berkeley's public radio station, and KPFA. Sep was awarded the Bay Guardian Goldie Award and has been nominated for the Best DJ by the San Francisco Weekly Music Awards. She has spun in London, Vancouver, Tijuana, New York, Washington, D.C., Miami, Portland, Seattle, Los Angeles, and so many more. She has also opened and shared the bill with Sly Robbie, Lee Scratch Perry, the Wailers, Toots and the Maytals, Kinky, and many others. DJ Seth, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure because, I had originally heard of you when I had Luminertia on the program last year. And he says that if there's one DJ that's been around the block so many times, it was yourself. So you are one of the longest running DJs in the San Francisco Bay Area. How does that feel?
I don't know. It is. I like to think of it. DJing for me is a joy and also a profession. So that means that I've had to rework the formula a few times.
Right.
Including most recently. So I just it's just something that I love to do. And so I decided that I want to continue to do it as long as I'm physically able to.
Oh, that is fantastic to hear because I don't know. I feel like whenever anybody is any sort of artist, right? Whether it's audio, visual arts, a lot of it is kind of reinterpreting yourself and your image to kind of fit with the time and the trends to kind of stay relevant. And for as long as you've been doing this, you've definitely been able to stay relevant in the area. So what sort of changes in kind of your image and I guess not only as a DJ but with the Dub Mission have you had to go through?
Well, it's interesting. I think when I first started, the first thing that probably helped me was being naive or ignorant, whichever
Hmm.
one you like.
Yeah.
I I started Dub Mission with some friends from what used to be KUSF, which is University of San Francisco, where we're sort of veterans of that scene because we all started in radio. And then it became KXFS after, or KXSF, I think, after it was sold. But KUSF was a legendary college radio station at a time when college radio was very important in terms of introducing people to new music, new artists. And that's kind of what I think of as my music education, as my music college. And so that was my beginning, was really on college radio. And I wasn't a club kid. I went to see live bands. I didn't see DJs.
Hmm.
And so I really didn't have a sense of how to do a club night. It really just began because someone called me on my radio show on KPFA. For a while, I did both of them. And one Monday night when I was doing my show, I played a lot of dub on the show, and someone asked, where can I go to hear this music? And I couldn't think of, there certainly were reggae clubs and dancehall clubs, but I didn't know of any dub clubs, and there weren't any. in the Bay Area. So I decided to open and have one, and that was really how it started. Was um, and the owner of the club, whom I knew I was doing some promotion for, asked me, "Oh, do you think there's an audience for this?" And based on some of the few enthusiasts, I said yes. And I don't think that was necessarily, there was not any market research behind it. So it just came out of that love of it, and it was slow for a long time, and the audience grew. So I really learned on the job about what it takes to run a club night, and it came up more out of truly wanting to share the music. And my approach, and I think the other DJ's approach at the time, was just really we're just learning. Like we would play a whole side of an album, which now sounds bizarre, but that's how we would start the night. Like, here's King Tubby, here's side A. And
Yeah.
then we would go into more of like a playing, tune after tune, and it sort of evolved over time to thinking about having it, yes, be really what we wanted it to be, but also a conversation with our audience. So we kept pushing our audience, but we also became more and more aware of what it takes to be club DJs and respond to that audience. But we never started from, this is the hottest thing, let's have a night, let's play all the tunes people want. We actually were kind of disdainful sometimes of people would say, well, play Bob Marley, and we're thinking, you can hear Bob Marley anytime, anywhere.
Right.
We had that kind of if you've seen High Fidelity, uh we were a little like those clerks, not to that extreme, but that's a very true portrayal of a certain kind of person that really champions underground music. And we were, I think, part of that, when it came to dub, which was luckily also was having a resurgence in interest in the sort of mid 90s when we started, because there were reissues of records that hadn't been available for a long time, since the 70s.
Right.
And then there was new artists like Thievery Corporation or whoever that were doing music that was very inspired by that music. So they were doing new music, which was really interesting to us because we wanted to kind of showcase the music in all its forms, not just old reissues, and old masters. And then, of course, over time, we, dub being a branch of reggae music in general, and dancehall being another part of that, we showcased it all. We did play more and more of all sorts of music that fit into what's a very wide category, including Bob Marley. There's no problem. But we were just kind of trying to explore it from a very specific point of view and almost advocate for it without really thinking about it. Just thinking, well, we love this music, we're going to share it. And whatever you can hear just buying a record at Tower Records or whatever, we don't see the point in that. That was kind of our point of view on it. And so we learned, and I really think I was very lucky in a way with all the ups and downs, being able to have the club night for long enough to have it grow and become more and more successful, and then run for as long as it did. It's not very common that you get that. And I tried to start other nights with other kinds of music, and I didn't have as much success. So it's not just because of me, it's because of the DJs that really devoted their time to it. And frankly, club owners that were responsive and wanted something unique, and were like, all right, well, I'll give you the Sunday night and you run with it. And were patient enough for us to grow it. And so I know that that's not common. So I'm very grateful for all of it, you know?
Yeah, and it also seems like, particularly with the dub mission, I mean, one, you were kind of tapping into a musical trend before it was really a trend, because I didn't come across dub until it was, already being, issued into hip hop music and being interpreted as dubstep in like the early 2000s, which was all right. It was new, it was exciting, but when I started doing research into the UK dub scene and kind of like going back, good, 7, 8 years, like there is so much depth to that genre, and I think with the dub mission in particular, being connected to that reggae scene, just like the message that's portrayed in that music, I think it helps build a strong community that keeps something like dub mission going. So you were able to build a community that kind of supports what you're doing and supports the expression of the different DJs that come in. I think that's just fantastic.
It was, you definitely put your finger on it. I mean, it's not the most popular form of music. I don't think it ever was, even when it became trendy and people were coming. And we could tell it was kind of funny, there were
Right,
people
right.
hadn't come, hadn't seen it, but and that was fine. And then after a while, they decided to move on to the next trend. But we did have a core of very dedicated followers and listeners, and that happens with dub and reggae. People who love it really love it, and it becomes a kind of a way of life for them. And
Yeah.
it was great to be part of that. And I mean, I think for me, there's a personal side of it as an artist, but there's also a community side of it in the sense that we were part of creating memories for a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And the club ended at the very end of 2018. And there's still people who talk about it. Just the other day, Nicodemus, posted a photo from about 10 years ago when he played many times. So it was just kind of something that comes up, and people have said, they've they had one of my mixtapes during the birth of their first child. They've met their
Wow.
wife at Dub Mission, stuff like that that you don't think of, and you just think, okay, well, we're part of some things beyond. Oh yeah, club night. It was kind of like, yes, it was Sunday night and a ritual for us for a lot of years, but because partially maybe because of how long it went on and how it was every week for 19 years. We kind of started as a monthly, and we at the very very end went back to a monthly schedule. But for a really long time, we were every Sunday in the same spot, and that's pretty unusual too. And I think it was
Mhm.
just became a thing for people, like they knew it was there. If they left for a year and came back, they could walk in and be like, oh, there it is, Sunday night. I know this is happening. So that part is a really unexpected joy when you realize that it was important to other people, because as an artist, I find that what I do has to be important to me in a way that's not related to anyone else. That's kind of, you have to feel it from yourself. That has to be a regular source for your ability to be able to continue. And then, of course, it's very necessary to get feedback and support from a community, as well as from your family, from your crew, basically, or
Mhm.
however you want to interpret that. But part of it has to just come from you fueling it, even if you had a bad night the night before, you know, next Sunday is coming. If you had a good night the night before, on Monday morning, next Sunday is coming. What are you going to do? And I feel like that's true of artists in general, is that there has to be a stubbornness is a really key ingredient to it. And I can be a stubborn person. So that can help, just like initially, I think ignorance of what I was taking on helped. Um,
Yeah, whenever you like, start something new with, a sense of naivety, as you said, it allows you to kind of be more fluid and to grow and kind of go with the flow and kind of, discover your own sense of self on the stage organically, right? But
absolutely.
But going back to what you were saying, like, as someone who's done promoting myself, there are certain weeks, certain shows that you just lose your ass on financially. But then you hear that story about, someone meeting their future wife, or there's a music festival that I helped organize and work with that, they actually had, a wedding there at one point because two people met there, 5 years before at a festival. So, it's just those little moments that kind of bring it all into perspective, and it adds a new level of value to being a promoter, being an on-stage artist. Because even if you're given so much of yourself, those little moments kind of show the crowd giving back in a way.
Yeah, and also making it their own, which
Yeah.
is which is great, because that's part of also what you have to, I think, understand and accept as an artist is, once you release something, literally, you're releasing it. It's part of it no longer belongs to you.
Yeah.
Part of it, once people sort of take it on as something that they like or want, uh, and it brings value to them, then it also partially belongs to them. At least the memory of it is just as important in a way. So that was a really lovely and sometimes surprising thing to me, because I can be in my own hole doing this thing, and it became a full-time occupation after a while, because I was booking different artists for it every week, in addition to rotating my crew of DJs. I was promoting it, and because of how long we were on, I went from promoting it in the traditional ways that I knew, like with radio and ticket giveaways and postering a couple of neighborhoods around there, to postering more of the city, doing social media, which became just constant, right? It can
Mhm.
it can be something that you just decide to stop, because unfortunately it just goes on forever.
Yeah.
So it became a bigger thing over time, and as a consequence, there were a number of things I didn't do. I didn't tour. I didn't play out as much, especially outside the Bay Area, because it was challenging enough just to do that every week, and also, eventually raise a family. And so there was a part of me that was almost like in my own little space doing it every week, and just putting the pieces together and making sure it was organized, at least, because that became clear that we had to have our stuff together in order to really have it continue and not die. And I committed to that, and obviously I had a lot of help as well, but I felt ultimately the responsibility was on my shoulders, and financially the responsibility was on me. So um it was just nice to kind of have that other part of it happening, and then me becoming aware that, hey, this means something for other people for their own reasons. And a lot of people communicated that over the years, and especially when we were winding down,
Mhm.
a lot of people communicated that to me, and that was great. It was important.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess it also gives you now the ability to, if you wanted to do more traveling, more touring, well, I mean, not particularly now given all the
Right.
circumstances, but it gives you the ability that if you want to expand that brand or that image, that you definitely can. But I don't know, let me ask you, so it seems that what drew you in was really broadcasting over music, or were you kind of drew into that reggae scene before you got into broadcasting?
No, actually, I was a journalism student at San Francisco State University,
Mhm.
and I had a college friend who was also in journalism, who had a radio show on KUSF, which was a different university, and we graduated before we even got into that. So um, I remember going to see her show with another friend, and basically, they both knew how much I loved music, and they were like, "You should try this." And I said, "No, that's not some. I hate my voice. I'm not gonna do this." But then I went to a promotions meeting, or a meeting in general. College radio stations had regular meetings, and they needed help with promotion, and my friend kicked me under the table, like, and I volunteered for that, and eventually I trained and got on the air, and that really opened up such a huge, that library, and it wasn't the biggest library. I
Right.
mean, college radio stations can have actually much bigger libraries. We had a small space, but just having new records come in every week that you have access to was amazing to me. And I was really into experimental music, post punk, and that kind of thing. That's where what really drew me in initially. But dub was also a form of experimental music in a
Mhm.
different way. And so my attraction really started from dub, and then, if you want to call it that, back, or I don't even think of it as being back, but into reggae. Like a lot of people start, they get maybe their Bob Marley or Mighty Diamonds or whatever records, and they really get into that, and then they discover all these other side things. And for me, I kind of entered the whole thing in a backdoor kind of way, where I was interested in dub and the experimental side of music, and then I got into the vocalists. Like, I got interested in Lee Perry, and then Lee Perry was, you know, the Wailers producer. And then, so,
Mhm.
I mean, it's kind of sounds incredible, but that stuff came later for me. Like Bob Marley and all that came later for me, not at the beginning. So I was really interested in exploring all kinds, and then got more and more into dub and reggae and dancehall, and uh, also just electronic music that was in a more of a world kind of bent, and just moved more and more in that direction, and then more and more really into reggae. um, and so my experience, and I mean, people can enter it in all different ways, but yeah, that's how I entered. That's what I meant when I said, and people would be surprised, like, oh, well, weren't you a club kid? Like, didn't you go and pass out flyers? And I'm like, nope, not until way later. I went to see bands. I mean, I didn't even think seeing DJs was a thing. I was sort of thought that would be weird. Why would I go see a DJ? And and then many years later, that's what I'm doing, and hoping to attract people to do exactly the same thing. So it can take you on various twists and turns, that's part of it if you do it a long time.
Yeah, so I guess let me ask you, even before, you were getting into experimental stuff when you were, going to see bands, what were some of your biggest musical influences before you really got going?
My God, that's just, it seems like such a lifetime ago. Uh, well, I guess it really goes back to, let me think. Uh, one of the biggest bands for me at a certain point was U2.
Really?
Yeah,
Early U2's so good.
very early. I sort of, I mean, it's a funny relationship, because I later on, it just didn't speak to me at all. Like, once they started on the rattle and hum and back, and that's still a long time ago.
Hmm.
And it's sort of like people ships passing in the night. Like, I was moving in a different direction too. So I think as a listener, you can also have a journey where your ears open up more, and there's nothing wrong with them, but it's like it serves you, or you're a certain age, so that's really important to you at a certain point, and now it wouldn't be so important to me.
Yeah.
So the same thing with radio. Like, over time, that's where I started, and I was on two radio stations at the same time. But when I was pregnant with my second child, I had the Monday night show on KPFA, and Sunday night before a dub mission, and another child coming, and I just thought, you know what, I still want to do other things I haven't done in music. And I was ready to let radio go at that point. It was just something that I had my journey with it, and I felt like I couldn't really do a lot more, or didn't want to do a lot more, and there were other things I was wanted to explore that I hadn't. So I was happy to be able to let it go at that point. Whereas if it happened 10 years before, I would have been very sad if someone said, no, starting tomorrow, you're not doing radio. And same thing happens with bands, or with anything. For me, it was definitely a learning experience, and almost like relationships that are important at some point and happen, but then you outgrow maybe. I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, well, kind of use the metaphor you were using earlier. When someone's in, when someone's watching live music, right? And they're really into it, like they're sharing that moment with an artist, and like you were saying, like they'll have that memory forever.
Right.
But I feel like certain like bands and genres of music that we get into, in a similar way, define certain portions or eras of our life, right? Certain mindsets we are in, in our development. And you just like you fall out of love with a person, you definitely fall out of love with certain kinds of music, but that's all part of the organic growing process. It's how you develop.
Absolutely. And especially as a teenager, for me, for my time, and it's no longer true, I think, but for me, music was far and away the most important thing. It was it. My husband and I talk about movies that he saw as a kid, and I'm like, I never saw that. Or as a teenager, never saw it.
Mhm.
How could you have not seen that? And it's like, I don't know. I was probably watching MTV. Like like that's pretty much was it for me. And music was really overwhelmingly the most important thing when it came to, um, if you want to call it a pastime or whatever. It was it. So it's funny to be the age I am, and my son, my oldest son, is 14, and so it's to not see that replicated is also interesting. Like, music is not the most important thing to them, you know. So
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Growing up, primarily in my teenage years, I was just so into the arts in general, but like I always had just a strong connection with music. And like I look back now at, the music I was listening to in the early 2000s, the mainstream stuff that most teenagers listen to, and it's just god awful. Like, if I didn't have the nostalgic connection to it, I would not be listening to
right.
Little Wayne or whoever I was listening to back then. But yeah, I mean, our preferences grow.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny. I just don't have a strong sense of memory, so I forget things. But really, and it's not like something I discovered at the time. I discovered it later, much later. But punk was a huge thing to me when I found it.
Hmm.
Um, and by the time I found it, it was already in some ways past its time and moved into post punk. But to me, that was a huge switch from going to listening to what was, as a kid, like the Beatles and this, the Stones and stuff on the radio, to really commercial music because that was what was available. Um, and then hearing punk and having it be like a like a figurative explosion in your mind, where you're like, that stuff is gone. Like,
Yeah.
not the Beatles so much, but the commercial stuff, REO Speedwagon or whatever, Journey, what was like huge at a certain point and stayed on, broadcast year after year, no matter how many years pass. It was, and you're like, that is stuff is just not useful or acceptable to me. And
Yeah.
so I moved into this whole new realm, and that happens. And the same thing with anything is like, if people are exposed to only certain foods, they figure that's the only food they like. And how would they really know if they're never ever exposed to a new food? And to me, that was like the same thing. Like, all of a sudden I found this new thing that was just mind blowing. On a certain level, it was sort of like, I was kind of a music nerd in the sense that I would go to libraries and pick out music books and read about the history of things, which is how I got into older records. But like, when I first heard, I'd heard so much about punk before I heard it, and it was always in the somewhat ominous kind of anarchists are coming tones. And then the first time I heard the Sex Pistols, I thought, this kind of sounds like Buddy Holly almost. This is so simple. Like, is this the devil? That you are talking about? And but the idea that they could be a band without really knowing how to play technically or play well, was in itself revolutionary, because that meant that you could do art without having to be in a very elite place, either by through accident of birth, like your parents are musicians, or or you're just enormously gifted with a voice, or you were in a position to take guitar lessons from the time you were 12, or you had enough money to be able to go in a studio, and all of that stuff started to fall away. And I think we're still going through that journey of people being able to do art without having certain things that they had to have access to in the past. And to me, that is a good thing. The digital revolution has brought so much music that's hard to, like, it's impossible actually to keep up with, and a lot of not great music. But to me, the idea that there are people in bedrooms all over the place that can make music, is worth that. It's worth it, because otherwise we wouldn't probably have a lot of art that we can have access to because of it, because people wouldn't be able to make it. They wouldn't have the money, they wouldn't have the resources, like the studio, they wouldn't have the musicians that they would have to pay. All of those things are obstacles that I like the idea that those things are falling away, or have fallen away to a point.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also love that you talk about how that revolution began with punk because, when I was in high school, the first punk I was introduced to was that like crappy early 2000s punk, that good Charlotte type stuff. It never really resonated with me. But then when I looked up like Black Flag, the Ramones, Dead Kennedys, like that stuff, it just fed my teenage angst. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I love like that the fact that punk music and that kind of anti-establishment, kind of fuck you attitude is what really fueled the cyberpunk revolution and like the hacker movements of the 90s that really tried to make all of this music that was that you had to pay for more accessible for people to download through piracy and whatnot. And that kind of punk attitude fueled that to the point that long run, we're talking about this digital revolution. The punks won. Like the way the corporations had to make money, they had to completely work around the fact that people aren't going to be paying for it anymore. They want to listen to it and they want to have a wide variety, not just what the gatekeepers decide that we will decide what we should have. But I'm interested in your perspective though, because you used to, back in the day, you had to be the person that would go through and just search and find this unknown music. And, nowadays that kind of stuff's done on like an algorithm on Spotify. So, just kind of what were your perspective in kind of that transition of the digital revolution to where we are now?
That's a discussion that you hear online so much between DJs and collectors and that kind of thing. But for me, the format never really mattered as much as the material.
Yeah.
I'm looking right now at the wall of records vinyl that I no longer use on this side. And on this side is a wall of CDs I never use. So, I mean, I've been around long enough that I've played vinyl, I've played CDs, I've played, Serato with vinyl. I've now used a controller. I've been on the radio, I've been in clubs, and now I'm streaming online, which is something I never thought I would do. It's something my brother talked to me about 2, 3 years ago, and I thought, huh, what is what? I don't know. So for me, finding the song that spoke to me and I could present in a way, in a tapestry of sort of songs that would speak to other people, which I think is what selecting is, what DJing is. That was the most important thing. And I had conversations with people who would say, what are you playing? What's that? And I would say who it was. And then they would say, can I get that on vinyl? And I'm like, no, I don't think so. I never seen it on vinyl. Maybe one day.
Hmm.
But so it was this thing of like, if I had to choose between, obviously I wanted it to sound all right, but vinyl can also sometimes, I mean, I would buy, I would buy a record, I would take it home, and it sounded terrible. And then I would take it back and say, I want the record, just give me one that's not damaged. And they say, well, the whole shipment was damaged. You know, if that one was damaged, the whole shipment was damaged. So to me, it was obviously, I didn't want it to sound bad, but the vinyl wasn't the primary thing for me. For some people, it is. It's very important to them. And there are definitely things about it, just the tactile aspect of it that I get, as including the art. You know, it can be an artwork in itself, no question. And a digital thing in my computer is not. But if I had a choice between not having something because it's not in the format that I use and having it, I would always go with the song over that, always. And so for me, that was the most important thing in my journey, is taking me through all these are tools, you know, the way I look at them. It's like saying, like a carpenter said, well, I like that hammer and I'm never going to buy a new hammer. To me, it wasn't the hammer, it was what I could build with it, you know. And that's continued to be the case. So
Huh. Now, see, that's a great way to look at it, because that's, I mean, that's just a perspective that I wouldn't have had on it, right? But, you being a DJ, you look at something in a completely different way than I would. So as you've kind of grown, and your musical tastes have become, well, let's say, more expansive over the years, is there certain pieces that you constantly find yourself going back to that have kind of remained true over the years?
well, it's funny because in a way I feel like I listen to a lot less kinds of music than I did. I really just dug in deep into dub and reggae and dancehall and that,
Mhm.
sort of remixes. And I started to do remixes myself. So that was a part of it that was interesting to me. Um, so, I don't listen to experimental jazz. I don't listen to improv. I don't listen to post punk music. I don't listen to indie. I just at some point decided to explore this one particular area because of Dub Mission, but then beyond, and also because frankly it's so huge that I don't have I can't, like, now, especially because of the digital revolution. There's more music that I can hope to get through. I mean, if I have, I don't know, uh, easily above terabytes of music on my hard drive that I haven't heard. So um I don't really, as far as things that I go back to, there are songs you fall in love with that are touchstones, that's true. But I also try to think about, new songs are always interesting as well if they touch you deeply. And it
Mhm.
becomes this thing of like where you want. I still, I'm not cynical about it still. I still hear something. I heard something 2 weeks ago and I was just so happy. And this happens to me still after more than 30 years of DJing. I still hear a song and I'm like, what the hell is that? Or know what it is. And luckily know the person and email them and say, yo, yeah, I know you haven't released it yet, but I want that, and play it. And I'm excited to play it. Then I'm excited that, next time I'm going to play this for people. It doesn't happen every day or anything, but it still happens. And so that keeps me, I makes me think, okay, I'm still on the right track. It still matters to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like, of all the different genres and music that that you've exposed yourself to, it really was that experimental bass sound,
Yeah.
that combination of that and reggae that kind of really gave you this passion for what you do. So let me ask you, what do you think makes reggae so compatible, or so compatible a sound with kind of that bass manipulation?
I think it's a form of music where the rhythm section, the drum and bass are paramount.
Mhm.
They're the real stars of the show. And if they're not good, you notice right away. They're really the heart and soul of the music. It's what everything else is built on. And I don't know enough about the science of it to know why it's so fundamentally moving. And maybe it isn't to everybody. Certainly, have this. I have encountered people who don't really like bass. you know, I don't know what that is. It's an entirely foreign. We might as well be from different planets. But I've had people that as soon as the bass is audible to them, they'll rush over to tell you that it's too loud. And um, they don't like it. They don't like feeling it. And to me, being able to feel it, that's everything. And that's probably why I've fallen in love so deeply with this music, above and beyond everything else. Is what I respond to. And to me, I think dub and reggae were so compelling because, especially with dub initially, it seemed to do these two conflicting things at the same time, and they're really not conflicting. That it would be interesting in a kind of intellectual sense with its experimentation or whatever, and you would be sort of exploring the sounds. Uh, but then it would really be moving on an emotional, soulful level. With the right combination of vocals and all the different parts, it did both at the same time. It wasn't just intellectually interesting the way some experimental can be, and it wasn't just soulful and moving the way more maybe other forms of music are. It put both in front of you at the same time, so it kind of fed your heart and soul at the same time. And that was really, like getting the whole package. Uh, when it was done
Yeah.
right, was really, really attractive and still is. So that's kind of why I could just dig down and still not feel like, well, gosh, I kind of like maybe really need to just go listen to some, I mean, I can listen to something else and enjoy it. It's not that, but listening to music is part of my work. So in that way, it changes it than just putting something on and doing whatever. I'm still not tired of it. So
Yeah, I just love the way that you phrase that it feeds your heart and soul, because the thing I think, I mean, for the people that like it, right? Like you just said, not everybody likes it,
not everyone
but
does. Yeah.
I feel that for those that like it, the drum and bass just touches something tribal, something primal, right, within them. And when you kind of like reach back into that ancestry, to who we were as a people, it kind of feeds that kind of ancestral gap a lot of people in the West have, right? Because we don't have that kind of, sustaining tribal community, especially in America. We don't have that kind of sustaining tribal community passed down. But I feel like when you combine that with reggae music, something that's so spiritually and politically uplifting, like it kind of, I don't know, it just like kind of resonates, and it feeds that heart and soul with kind of a sense of purpose or meaning with one's life.
It certainly has that, and that's part of its tradition too, because it's sufferers music. It's music made by people who were slaves,
Yeah.
and are looking, still for liberation and justice. That's built in as well for the most part. I mean, there's obviously the slack part of it, just like there is with a lot of kinds of music, but the heart of it with roots and reggae is about uh, moving towards a more just place and telling your story of what it's like to live in an oppressed society. So, I mean, that's all attractive as well to me. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's been studies made, and maybe I should read them and educate myself about what it is about the drum that's so compelling to us still as human beings. But it could be that it replicates heartbeat. I mean,
Mhm.
is it not the oldest instrument or one of the oldest? So I mean, there's something beyond words for us, which is the same thing with music. It's attractive because it's beyond words. I used to be a writer. That's what I studied, and as a journalist, that's what I was interested in. And I moved away from it and into music because I think it communicated something that words can't communicate. So it was really attractive to me in that way, that I could sort of do something with it that I couldn't do with words. At
Mhm.
least I couldn't. So, um, think there's a lot there that people maybe can't even explain to themselves, but it's it's certainly true that it's important to us and it moves us and it feeds us, you know. And there have been studies about how it's a massive antidepressant. Like there are people who, when they're depressed and they listen to music, nothing makes them feel better than that. So yeah, there's all sorts of things in there that we probably haven't even completely explored. Like I think music therapy is a big part of what's going on now with that. And I did attend um, a an event by Subpack, and Subpack is, just to be very quick about it, is sort of like a tool, something that you wear, so that when you're producing music, let's say if you can't have the music be really loud, you feel the bass in your body. And it's a lot of people have found it helpful in terms of being able to produce the kind of music they want and have it the kind of have the resonance they want on a bass level. But part of what they were doing, and I'm sure other people maybe are exploring it as well, other companies, is the idea of the bass moving through your body and how it can be a positive healing thing. Now, again, some people were not really probably happy with that at all, just like they don't appreciate bass moving through the air towards them, even. But I remember sitting in this chair and listening to this music while I could feel the bass moving through my body, actually, like, you know, because you're connected to it. So it's not just coming through to you through your ears. And it really makes a difference. After 10 minutes, you feel really different than you did before. So there's definitely a lot there that we haven't really quite discovered yet. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been studies of how different keys of music have direct correspondence to, alterations of mood. But, I mean, just that idea of like, being able to, feel the bass move with you. Man, I was trying to look up his name real quick, but I couldn't find the study that I had saved. It was a while ago because I used to do art therapy, and there was and I've done some music therapy as well. But there's one psychologist. He also has like a master's in jazz. So his entire art therapy program is he has just this big room full of all sorts of instruments. And depending on what you're feeling, he'll give you an instrument that kind of mimics that. So like if someone comes in, flustered, angry, he gives you the drums, and then he'll just pick up whatever instrument he plays, because I'm sure he plays several, and just free jams with you and just lets you get it out. So, that kind of thing, where you're just drumming on a drum, finding your own rhythm, you feel that for the first time coming through. And I don't know, I always feel like people who might not like a bass or bass sounds at first, man, when you need to pick up a bass and just jam around on it, because once you feel that coming from your own fingers and kind of resonating with you, even if it's not in the right key, it's going to help you fall in love with that kind of sound and have a greater appreciation for it.
Yeah, if you find it, I'd definitely love to read it. I think that would be an amazing thing if you had a degree in psychology and music. I think that's a double threat right there. That's you're gonna make connections that the rest of us maybe only guess at. You know.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to find. I discovered him through a music video that was well, I wouldn't say a music video, more like a documentary style video that on YouTube that I can send you. But when I was working with my clients, I was working with adolescent boys, so we'd have just an entire room filled with like random drums, and like I'd bring in my keyboard, let them take turns on it, and it just kind of let them express themselves on instruments for the first time. Like it really gives you a new avenue of expression that you never really thought you'd had.
Absolutely, you've done a lot of good. That's a huge thing, I think. And I wish that we had that as just part of our regular idea of education, not so much music
Yeah.
class in the traditional sense, but giving people the ability to realize that they can be creative, that they don't have to have all these rules or check all these boxes first before they have permission to touch an instrument or paint or do anything. I think would be really good for us.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you there. So let me ask you, now played shows all over the world. Did you really start touring after the dub mission had ended, or was it something that you kind of got the itch to do while you were still running it?
At first I really was overwhelmed, but people would start to ask me like, "Well, have you played these places?" And there's a lot I haven't done actually. I mean, that's a short list, for a DJ that's been around as long as I have.
Mhm.
Um, but I did start to do more because I didn't have the responsibility of a weekly party. And I hope to do that again once COVID is over. It is also harder for me. It was just difficult because um, how many days do you want to be away from your family? You
Yeah.
know, to really be successful on that level, I would have to be gone for months, and I didn't want to do that. I just found that hard for me. It's always been a push and pull, not because of even what other people may think or say, but just my internal um, decisions. Has always been a conflict for me between being a good mom and being a good artist, or feeding both the way I feel like I need to. And I think it's something that you just, for me anyway, I decided that um, it's a contradiction, and that I just have to do my best at both and be happy that I can't be good enough in either category the way I would want to be. Um, but I found them to be incompatible lifestyles. But something that I wanted both. So that's how I could make it work. But I didn't want to be away from them, especially when they were younger. I didn't want to be away from them for more than a week, let's say.
Yeah.
So that was not easy. And also, I wasn't having, it wasn't like people were beating down my door saying, go on the road with me. It was something I had to push to do because this isn't the most popular or lucrative form of music by any means. So I had to put it together as well. So that in that sense, it was still had to be very self-driven to make it happen.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess even though you haven't maybe toured as much as you thought you may have, you have shared the bill with some amazing artists. I guess which shows were you most honored to be a part of, or which acts were you most honored to share the bill with?
Well, I would say that the ones that are probably first on that list, Lee Perry was a big influence on me, so I loved sharing the bill a number of times with him. And Sly and Robbie, I have just tremendous respect for. I mean, they really built the foundation of this music, and no one, I don't think, can touch their record in terms of how much they've produced in their studios or for other people. So those two were pretty big. Just watching them um, was an experience for me because it's like here's somebody who's done this for decades and decades, and to me that's obviously always attractive because that's what I've want to do and trying to do. So and I've gone through their ups and downs the way any artist probably will if they're going
Mhm.
to stick around. So I would say those two were really important to me. But I mean, I have respect for a lot of artists that I've opened for. But Adrian Sherwood was someone that I booked at Dub Mission for both the fifth anniversary and the 15th anniversary. Fifth was around the time we really hit our stride or started, and 15 was a pretty big one. And that year was also the 30th anniversary of his record label, On You Sound. And On You Sound was the label that really introduced me to dub. It
Mhm.
was the one that really broke it open for me in a big way. Because he did experimental music and then he did dub too, and so that I sort of walked through that from one side of his catalog to the other side. So that was huge because there's someone that I know personally, but has also been a massive influence on me. So I would say those three off the top of my head.
Awesome. Now, Now, I guess getting a chance to work with Lee Perry and them. Did you ever get a chance to, and you said you had played with them a few times. Did you ever get a chance to kind of build that that relationship where you could be collaborative with the scene and kind of talk about different things? How did they help you maybe develop into more of an artist?
Um, a really good friend of mine is actually the band leader for Lee Perry's touring band.
Okay.
I don't really, and it's someone that I've talked to and discussed ideas with. But um, Lee is an exceptional human being in many many ways. So I never really tried to engage him that way because I don't think it would be really fruitful. Um, my relationship was really with the music he made more than with him as a
Okay.
person, if that makes sense. it's
Hmm.
it's sort of, I think, especially when you start out, um, people have questions about technique, and technique is important as a DJ. But the other side that's, I would say, even more important is learning how to listen and select. And that's really important. And it goes beyond, well, you know, there are bangers, there's things that people really like. It's like, yeah, it depends on what kind of DJ you are. But in my position, I think the most important thing I had and still have is the ability to select and to go through and find not just songs or good songs, but songs that work for me and within what I'm trying to do. Um, and so in that way, the songs themselves can be really instructive. They can be like your teachers. The song is teaching you something that you maybe didn't know before.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
that's interesting that you put it that way because, primarily when you start to get to the point, as an artist, that you can listen to a song and break down the different components and how they kind of interact with each other, that you can start to notice the subtleties of how certain timings work up and how certain things kind of feed off each other for the benefit of the song.
yeah, exactly. And as a DJ, you're really weaving. It's not even just that particular song. You're doing this thing where you're weaving all these sounds together from beginning of your set to the end, and you're starting somewhere and ending somewhere else. And I do plan my sets broadly. That's important to me. So I'm also, after all these years especially, I can't help but think in terms of, if I like it, also how does it fit within, while still being lucky enough to DJ relatively broad era of sounds. The reggae can be really broad. That's why it works for me to have listened to it for so long and still feel like I'm not anywhere near, um, you know, getting over what it is about. It still continues to grow and evolve and has a rich history, but also a future. Um, so it becomes this thing of you thinking of it as itself, this particular song and how it moves you, but also, oh, I think this would work in this kind of set or in that kind of set or in beginning or middle or end or whatever. That just starts to come to you as well. But I think that's really important. Like as a DJ, if someone said, well, what do I need to do? And I'm like, you need to find your music, and you need to continue to explore your music if it matters to you that way. I think that's just as important as knowing how to beat match, or those things are important too, but that part is really important, and I think not sort of seen, or seen as being an obviously important thing to study or to do.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with that because I mean, technique is important and you could learn technique from a variety of different kinds of music. But what you want to do is find the sound that's going to give you the passion to do something long term, to have, longevity, or in, your case with Dub Mission, probably the hardest thing was consistency, to be able to dedicate yourself to that one genre of music, to keep expanding on it and preserving it throughout the years.
Yeah, and keeping it interesting for myself and for the crowd,
Yeah.
and um That's also something that I think, I was privileged to have to be able to do that. Because if I was in a situation and people push you towards it where they're like, I want to hear this, this, and this. And it's like, okay, but if I only played, 20 or 30 songs for 30 years, I would go insane. That's not what I
Yeah.
want to do. So you have to continue to push for yourself as well as an artist and find new things, and that may or may not resonate with an audience. So then you have to think, well, I'm not just DJing obviously for myself, so how do I make sure that the conversation doesn't shut down,
Hmm.
but at the same time I didn't want to just cater. That's not something that would give me what I needed from it. I didn't just want the crowd to go wild over the two songs I knew they were gonna really go wild about and go, well, that's good enough for me.
Hmm.
And I gotta do that because that's what I want. It's more like I wanted to be able to take them somewhere that maybe they didn't know they wanted to go, or have them hear something maybe they didn't know existed or wanted to hear at the same time as going, oh yeah, and I also had a good time because she played my jam or whatever. Um, and so that was a push and pull for me. I'm actually an introvert. So in a way that was kind of interesting to be a DJ in a club too, because it wasn't about the party for me, in the sense of like, I have to be somewhere and I have to have a lot of people love me. That wasn't, I'm not dissing that. I really think that was actually, if anything, should have had more appreciation for that as a thing than I did. So I don't want to sound like that's a bad thing. But I just didn't come from that. I was an introvert, and I am an introvert. So you have to come at it from a different perspective. But I think you can. That's my point. Is like, I think you can be different kinds of people and do what you want.
Yeah.
I've had people say, well, you don't look like a DJ to me. If they saw me at a music convention or whatever. And I had to go, what do you think a DJ looks like? And there was a silence because like we both knew, right? So yeah, of course. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Yeah, I certainly didn't see people that look like me or were like me anywhere in the clubs or anywhere really. That but that didn't stop me from doing it because I wanted to. So I think you got to push past that if you don't see it, you know?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's so unique about your perspective that you brought to your music is that, I mean, I think it always goes back to the fact that you were a journalist, right? So you approach that music genre and, even making music with that kind of inquisitive mindset that, you're analytical in the way you can break things down, understand how they merge together. You're talking about throwing in those two bangers. Once you know that they were bangers, I'm sure you approach those songs different ways, how to lead into them certain ways, how to maybe use those as a way to lead them in an area that they didn't think that they were going, and how to kind of experiment with those different facets of those songs as tools to kind of approach your message multiple ways.
Right, exactly. I mean, you hit it on the head. It's finding the connections, or at least like thinking, okay, I see the connections. I want to make the connections obvious to them as well. You know?
Right. Now, I gotta ask you, just because you shared the bill with one of the bands that really brought me into reggae music was Toots and the Maytals. I have to ask you, did you ever get a chance to meet or interact with Nathaniel Hibbert, rest in power?
No, and he was. I certainly did a very quick thing, but I didn't push in. Um, I was DJing at the time anyway, and as I've gotten older, the idea of staying around for till 3 in the morning for that moment has become harder and harder. But I did share the bill with him, and that was a very memorable show, the one last year. So it's heartbreaking. It's really, I mean, he was still in full power.
Oh
He was
yeah.
yeah, he could sing, and people mentioned it. He was this far away from the mic and could, you know uh um but I mean, with Lee, there was that moment I wanted that photo or whatever, and I could have done that, I guess. But a lot of times, especially at my age and having gone, that sort of connection was way more important to me when I was younger.
Hmm.
Now I sort of feel like the fact that I was DJing to open for him was just enough of that. It replaces the pick and the handshake, which I've done with
Yeah.
people. And it's such a short moment that I could do without it with him. I wish I had. There's no question. But he, even in that sort of passing by, he was really quite kind and kind of acknowledged me and looked at me before he went backstage. And I DJ'd the whole time before he got on, so there wasn't any time that I could interact with him before that. But as somebody who's also an artist, I kind of have that feeling of, I know they get approached all the time, and just before the set, I kind of think, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to wait, or I'm going to try to look for the right moment, if that. But frequently, I don't need it, especially if I've had the opportunity to open. I feel like that's almost for me the conversation, or I don't know how to explain it, but that
Yeah.
kind of feeds me more. And the music feeds me. So again, like I said, it's like his music is the teacher. And meeting him would be great because I'd heard so much about how kind he was and how great he was that way. And so that would have been terrific, but I'd had enough of the other stuff. I'm just heartbroken that
Yeah.
this should not have happened. Is one of the life's injustices. It's really, it was such a huge loss, you know.
Yeah, and I feel like that's also one of the things that just is going to make reggae such a long-lasting genre is just it points out those injustices, but in doing so, it gives you the empowerment to feel that you can be engaged to do something about them. I mean, that's the one thing that's always made reggae, resonant with me is that, it feels that you have the power to take control and, kind of help, right those wrongs. And, you were saying before, it's music of oppressed people. I feel the same way about, you look back at blues music, right? And
Right.
how that was, a music of an oppressed people and how that became, rock and roll with that emergence with like electronic instruments and folk music in the 60s when you had the civil rights movement going on, the anti-war movements, also the songs of oppressed people, even to modern hip-hop music,
Right.
when that old
Absolutely.
school hip hop, like it was really, trying to tell people, who weren't, really listening and turning a blind eye to the suffering of the inner cities, exactly what was going on in those streets. And, art and music is a great way to kind of share those personal feelings on injustices, personal feelings on culture and society. And, when you help create something like Dub Mission that, became a citywide thing, it really kind of helps you tell the stories of that particular city and that particular community.
For sure. I think if, certainly some people seem to be able to listen to music and not have that sort of thing really penetrate. But I think most people, is certainly true from reggae, and I've seen it many times. There's no way that you can listen to it for a really long time, I think, for most people, if not everybody, and not develop that consciousness if you're not experiencing it yourself, if you're not experiencing it in real life, because you're not a minority or whatever. Certainly listening to it, I think, unless somebody's really not open to it at all, I think does affect the change in the person. And I've seen that. I've seen people's commitment to their community and the way they look at society, having been reggae fans from, since they were young. There's no question that it's informed it, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I got to thank you for helping, perpetuate that within your own community and everything that you've done. So, as, COVID has kind of just completely turned the world in a 180, what sort of things have you been doing as a DJ to kind of evolve with the times?
Yeah, that was a really difficult thing. I already had made the transition from Dub Mission, which kind of was like my first child. I joke about how it was my baby before I had a baby, and letting go of that and what that meant. Um, because it was such a huge part of my life for so many years. And I'd already sort of decided that, yes, I am going to, the DJing was even more important to me than a night, than having a club night and that kind of thing. And I wanted to continue. And then I had that conversation with a few friends because they weren't part of the team, so they had maybe a little bit of a objectivity about it, but they knew and understood the mission really well. And I had a few conversations where like, what should I do? If you were me, what would you do? Just to hear people out, from the outside the sphere. And I got what you were saying initially in our conversation was like, well, it's a known thing. It's valuable. And if you want to continue it in a way, you can. The question is, how are you going to do it? You can do it if you want to. And so I decided that the DJing piece was still important to me. So I was doing that, just opening for others and playing a broader range of shows in a broader area, because I wasn't like I had to be here on Sunday night kind of deal or work all week to prepare for it. And I was finding jobs on the side to try to finance it because I didn't have that weekly thing anymore. So all the pieces were, all the pieces kind of were in place, and I definitely had some conflicts with things in terms of what I wasn't doing, because I'm always thinking about what I'm not doing, not just what I am doing, but what's not getting done artistically. So there was some, vague kind of, not so much maybe vague, depending on the day, unhappiness at the same time as I made most of the pieces kind of work and continue to do it. And then COVID was like a tsunami, just basically went, I'm taking everything away now. It's just, and this is the first time since I started working, period, uh, that I didn't have any jobs, because I've always had multiple things happening. So if one thing went away, at least I had other things, other contracts, whether doing promotion or whatever. Um, and none of them are lucrative, but together they kind of, I made it work. And this was like the first time since my early 20s when it was like it was all gone. It was just no gigs, no day jobs, no,
Yeah.
uh, and unemployment. It's the first time I've gotten unemployment ever. Um, so it was really just to have this slate wiped clean was kind of crazy. Um, so I started to look into streaming. My son streams, and so it was funny because he was helping. He's a gamer. I started to look into that and put that together. So I'm doing uh, two different streams a week. One is reggae, one is jungle drum and bass, which is connected, but I'd not DJed that form of music on its own for a really long time. So it kind of gave me an opportunity to do that too. And so I put those together, and then as far as work, like there is nothing. So I would say the thing that it's done, obviously, is it's been difficult for everybody in different ways, but I try to also remember that it has given me a chance to stop and think in a way that you're usually not able to, where you think, all right, so certainly there are things I miss, but what do I not miss? And we've even had this conversation as a family,
Mhm.
because there are people who work um, any kind of job that, whether they're working or not, they're not working the same way they have for probably most of their lives as adults. And I put that question to my husband, like, if it's one thing that you wouldn't want to go back to, what is it? And so the same the same kind of fits for me, is I have some answers about things that I don't want to do. It's not artistic,
Yeah.
but the other stuff that you have to do to make it work, and what do you want to do and not do. So I wouldn't presume that everybody can do that. In some ways, I'm really lucky. And I try to remind myself of that in days that are really tough, and some days were really hard. Uncertainty for me is a difficult thing to begin with. As my husband says, I don't do well with uncertainty, but this has been an exercise in uncertainty. Like, oh, we're gonna not know for a while, and now we're not gonna not know for a while longer, and deal with it, you know. And that's kind of what I tell myself. And but I also think, okay, here's a chance for you to think about, or just be still for a minute and think about what is it that you didn't like or didn't wasn't working, and is there a way of not doing that when you go back?
Yeah.
And I don't know if there is, frankly, because financial situations are always an issue for artists unless they're financially secure. There's always a question, and it takes a lot of space, more than I like to give it space to, but it just does. Especially if you have a family, that's a whole other level. But I think it's just given me a chance to think about it, and I hope I can put that into action. I hope when we go back, I can say, well, there were these things I realized that I don't want to do anymore, you know. And obviously, COVID being deadly, and being connected on social media gives you a chance to see how life is really short, you know. And it's not just
Yeah.
COVID. I mean, it can be all sorts of things, but so many people have passed, not all from COVID, that you just start to think, you know, we literally don't have a lot of time. We just don't live as if that's the that's the case. Maybe it's hard to constantly think, I don't know how much time I have, but I try to remind myself, like, you don't have as much time as you think. So what's important in that light, and what's not important? You know, what's not worth wasting time on?
Yeah.
You know, and I try
Yeah.
to remember that. Like, okay, is that really that important? Because if it isn't, let's just move on, you know.
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of the benefits of COVID long term is that I don't know it reminds me of a practice German philosophers used to use. They'd have these things called cat mortems or memento moris, where when they were writing their philosophical thoughts or just sitting there in their towers philosophizing, they would keep a skull on their desk, a human skull, to constantly remind them that death was right around the corner and to make the most of every moment that you have to find meaning in it. And, that kind of existential reckoning is what I think a lot of people in this country really needed. And I think that is what, COVID really is on a mass scale for our culture, is that it's that reminder that don't get distracted by the things that don't matter, social media, arguing with that one guy, all these little things that you focus on in life that really don't matter whatsoever. It really kind of reframes your perspective on what you want to focus on going forward.
Yeah, I try to keep that skull in my head, you know. Can you imagine what it'd be like if every desk came with that skull?
Yeah.
Imagine,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure no business would ever want that. But imagine if you went to work and right next to your cup of coffee or whatever was that skull every day. People would be like, I quit. No, whatever. It's not very productive on that sort of model. But I try to keep that skull in my head. I mean, maybe it'd be useful to get one. I don't know, or maybe it'd be too much because it is in there. But I I try to keep telling myself it's not necessarily a bad thing for you to think about that skull, once in a
Mhm.
while.
Yeah, and honestly, if this kept on going, with your perspective and background, have you ever thought about coming full circle and going back in the writing, actually writing about music and, kind of rediscovering that passion in an old medium?
You know, no, because like I said, I think my love affair with music is really still so strong, and it's become. I think I can um, communicate better with music than I did with words, and that's always. I mean, it's always a tool. I've certainly did promotion and music and writing helps
Mhm.
that. It's so. I mean, it's absolutely a necessary tool, but I do find it in some ways constricting in a way that music isn't. So to me, my frustration and or challenge is that I still haven't done certain things in music that I want to do. Um, so I'm still, I'm still engaged with that. I mean, I like I said, it's still engaging as a DJ, but it's also challenging in ways that I haven't pursued yet, or I find that I'm pursuing, but I haven't done for very long. So um, that's what the skull is kind of about. Like, hey, how much time do you think you have here? Let's try to make this happen.
Awesome. Well, folks, if you are listening to this episode, the day it comes out, it's a Tuesday. So you know what? DJ Seth is going to be live streaming tonight, and she's going to be live streaming Thursday as well. And what is your preferred streaming outlet? Do you use Twitch?
Yes, I'm on Twitch, so it's twitch.tv/DJ Sep. And Tuesdays and Thursdays are when I normally stream every week uh, at 3 p.m. on the West Coast. So that's 5 p.m. Chicago time, I think.
Awesome. Awesome. So, yeah, folks, if you are listening to this right now, even if you're listening to this, a few weeks down the line, every Tuesday, every Thursday, hop on Twitch and show her some support because, she has been doing this forever and she has been very passionate in keeping this kind of scene, music, and message alive. DJ Seth, I want to thank you for coming on the show and spending some time with me, kind of talking about the way you perceive music in the world.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been really enjoyable. And
Awesome.
thanks for doing the podcast. This is exactly the sort of thing that I'm really interested in with people and artists and their process and thinking. So it's a great thing you're putting out there.
Well, thank you much. Have you ever thought about doing a podcast of your own with your connections and experience? I'm sure you could use it as a way to kind of explore, more of the subtleties of the dub genre.
I wouldn't rule it out. Let's put it that way.
Well, I'm gonna tell you, if you end up doing that, I would be your subscriber day one. But folks, this has been DJ Seth. Make sure you go over to her Twitch, watch her stream every Tuesday and Thursday night, and that's gonna be 5 p.m. Chicago time. But I'm sure she has a backlog of videos as well on there. So if you can't watch her live, definitely make sure to hop on, check out some of the videos, and immerse yourself with some of the stuff she's created. Have a great one, folks. Bye.